Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest in conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today we're talking to independent aviation analyst Brendan Sobie. He's based in Singapore. Brendan, it's been a while. Welcome back. Good to see you.
It's great to be back on the show again after 2 years.
Well, I hope our internet holds up. We had a little bit of problem before, so we'll see how we do with this take. We were talking earlier, aviation has survived COVID, but not without a lot of pain, a lot of lost jobs, things like that. Give us an overall view very quickly what you're seeing globally and then in Asia specifically.
Well, globally, we're almost fully recovered. We're like 97, 98%. Internationals maybe at 90%, but domestics like at 110%. So the industry has recovered faster than most people would have predicted a year and a half, 2 years ago. So everything is looking up. In Asia, of course, we're a little bit behind just because borders reopened later here, and it's taking a bit longer to get to a full recovery. And we'll talk about this later. And it does depend, of course, on the region or sub-region of Asia, as well as the market. The recovery in many cases has been a bit uneven, both globally from a regional perspective, but even within Asia, country by country, we're seeing different things in different countries. So overall, I'd say it's like one of these scenarios where you can either say it's glass half full, glass half empty. Glass half full in that airlines are doing very well financially. Yields have been very high, which has helped the financial situation, and the market has recovered very rapidly. Demand is higher than supply. Demand has come back in a big way, obviously. Glass half empty, of course, there's a lot of issues, manpower issues, supply issues, geopolitical issues, and then you have a lot of looming potential challenges over the next few years, which could impact growth as well as profitability. So overall, pretty good, but certainly some clouds are still out there.
Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting to me. Like I said, I flew to Europe a couple of months ago, and then I was in the U.S. as well. Airports are full, the flights are full, things are looking up. But the other people in the industry that I talked to, full recovery not till next year. Would you agree?
It depends what you're looking at. But for certainly for Asia, the market won't be fully recovered this year, and next year at earliest. A lot can happen over the next 6 to 12 months, of course. I talk a lot about the last mile, which is the last 10% here in Asia. I talk about this quite a lot. The last remaining portion of recovery, particularly with the international market. So you can get to 90%, like we're here in Singapore is 90%, in other markets as well. We're at 90%, but that last 10% is the most difficult, just because airlines cut back during the pandemic. They don't have the same number of aircraft. In some cases, there's manpower issues at the airlines or the airports. So it's hard to get that last 10%. The demand might be there, but the supply often isn't there. And of course, it's not easy to bring in extra aircraft, and you have new supply chain issues now with the Pratt and Whitney crisis and with the MRO issues and the parts issues. So that even makes it even harder. So that last 10% or last 5% in some cases might take a lot longer than people expect. So if you're really insisting on 100% as declaring the full recovery, it could be a while. We could be stalled at 95% or 90% in some markets.
Okay, I hate to talk about COVID again. I know everybody's sick of it, but there's talk about a new variant that's popped up somewhere. The U.S. is urging people to get vaccinated with a new vaccine, an updated vaccine. Is this something that aviation should worry about? And the reason I ask this is because during the pandemic, everybody came out with a digital health pass. IATA had one. I lost track of how many there were. Is the industry ready in case something like that happens again?
Well, I don't think we were talking about digital health passes last time I was on the show. Just under 2 years ago, it was kind of the hot topic, and nothing was happening. It was all over the place. There was no standard, and fortunately, it became moot because that was not going anywhere. But really, I mean, this variant thing, I mean, it's never ending, right? I mean, it's just like the flu or other viruses. It's there's always going to be something out there, and nobody really knows, if what the reaction will be and what the impact will be. I mean, I think airlines just have to be flexible, and the industry, hopefully learn some lessons from the pandemic. But I would say a lot of the issues were never really fully resolved, so could come back. But at this point, I think you kind of have to just hope for the best, and that we'll continue to have viruses of concern and new variants of the flu and all sorts of things, but that won't set back the industry completely. But anything can happen. I mean, there could be other events that are out of the control of the airlines that can crop up. This is the thing with the aviation industry. You never know what's around the corner. There's a lot of variables out there. There's a lot of uncontrollable events that can happen at any time that could devastate the industry. So you always have to kind of be prepared for that, for those scenarios.
Okay. Closer to home, let's talk about China very briefly. China and the U.S. Read the other day that they recently agreed to double flights between the two countries. Do you see China opening up further? Is this something we can look forward to? Because everybody's waiting for the Chinese to come back.
I mean, the Chinese have come back in some markets, but in other markets they haven't come back, and even in Asia that it really varies. But I mean, the U.S. thing is actually small because the impact would be small because the base of flights is so minimal compared to what they had. So I mean, you could increase the number of flights several fold, and you won't have an issue filling those flights. Just because the ethnic traffic, the student traffic, the traffic that is there between China and the U.S. Hasn't been sufficiently served given the very limited capacity due to the lack of nonstop flights that have been permitted. So people have been going via hubs, like Tokyo or Seoul, to fly between the two countries, and that has, and the lack of capacity has put pressure on fares. So it's good, hopefully this is just the first step. We'll have more and more flights again restored to the U.S., between the U.S. and China. Group travel is now allowed to the U.S. and to other countries as well, although group travel overall has been very slow to come back. So it's a demand issue, not necessarily whether it's allowed or not, or whether the flights are there. You have to have both the demand and the capacity to make this happen. And at the moment, outbound demand from China is just not the same. It is still down, and it's significantly different in terms of the patterns. You have more FIT. You have and also where they're going is quite different. So you have some markets which are fully recovered in terms of China traffic and international traffic, and other markets that are a very tiny fraction of what they were.
Well, closer to where you and I are here in Southeast Asia, I'm in Cambodia, and you recently mentioned that you were in my neighborhood. You were up in Siem Reap, I guess, visiting the temples. And going to combine a couple of questions here. Is Southeast Asia rebounding as fast as you thought it would, or is it slower? And are any particular countries doing better or worse than others?
Yeah, Southeast Asia is doing probably more or less as expected, but it's like I was saying before, the recovery is very uneven, just generally. But if you look at Southeast Asia, that's the case as well, where some markets are recovering a lot more than others. Part of it is the reliance on China, because obviously China is not back fully yet. I mean, and it's also, even though Southeast Asia China capacity is more than 50% back, it's the number of flights between Southeast Asia and China are not that low, but the way they're spread around the region is a lot different. So you have some markets that are like Cambodia and particularly Siem Reap, where the flights are only at 5% normal levels, and so in Siem Reap and Cambodia generally, China's like a third of the market pre-COVID. So it's a high reliance on China. So those markets that have a high reliance on China and that particularly have a high reliance on group travel, because that's the segment that hasn't come back. Cambodia and most of the other Southeast Asian countries were on the initial list back in February of countries that group travel is permitted to. And a lot of the other countries have only been added a lot more recently. But if the demand is not there for the group travel, or people are just not traveling in groups to these countries, then that traffic's not there. So those countries like Cambodia, and particularly Siem Reap, very much a group destination, a Chinese group destination pre-COVID. If the group travel from China doesn't come back, then it's hard to recover. But Siem Reap in particular, one of the worst performing markets in the region and globally. Siem Reap is about 25% pre-COVID levels in terms of overall traffic, and they've been stalled at that for almost a year now. So if you look at like fourth quarter last year, they were at 25%. First quarter again, 25% of this year. Second quarter this year, 25%. Third quarter this year, figures are not out yet, but based on capacity, traffic again will be about 25% of 2019 levels. Cambodia, overall, Phnom Penh is doing a little bit better, but also below average. So Cambodia is, maybe 60% recovered. International traffic in Southeast Asia overall in the region is 80% recovered. Domestic is also 80-85% recovered. Also an uneven recovery for domestic, where you have markets like the Philippines and Vietnam, which are fully recovered or over their 2019 levels, but then you have other markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand that are not back yet. Are generally at 80-85% or so. So it's quite mixed. Cambodia definitely stands out, but some of the other, there are other markets that are not performing or are below average as well, both international and domestic. For domestic, Indonesia hasn't been doing very well, I would say, in terms of recovery. I mean, it's not like they've been doing badly, but I mean they're only at like 80% maybe. And if you look at, like, to say the other top 6 domestic markets in the world, Indonesia was number 6 in 2019, number 5 in 2018. These are the main domestic markets in the world, like, China, US, India, Japan, Brazil. They're all fully recovered. So Indonesia is the only one that's not fully recovered. So that's not too encouraging, I would say. And in fact, Indonesia had a contraction in 2019. So if you look at their numbers compared to 2018, they're way down below 2018 and still down below 2019. We can talk about Indonesia a bit more later, but it is definitely an uneven recovery in Southeast Asia. But overall, 80% recovered, which is a little bit less than the global average, but overall doing well. And airlines also a very mixed story in Southeast Asia. I mean, generally the airlines are profitable again on a whole level, and revenue has fully recovered, even though traffic hasn't fully recovered because of the higher yields. But once you peel that back, some airlines are struggling and are in quite a weak financial position.
Okay, Brendan, we need to take a quick break here to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We're in conversation with independent aviation analyst Brendan Sobie. Before the break, we were talking about Asia overall, Southeast Asia, different areas. You also mentioned some airlines are sort of teetering on the edge financially in some places. Recently, though, we've seen I don't know if a spate of orders is the way to term it, but we've seen a lot of orders, mainly for narrow bodies, a lot of 737s, A320s. I saw Tony Fernandez talking in Singapore yesterday, I think it was. He's actually talking about wide bodies. I mean, are airlines focused on bringing in new equipment and retiring the older ones, or are they trying to get everything that they can out of the older planes?
I mean, there's a lot of things going on at the same time. I mean, generally speaking, airlines in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, massive order book, or renewing their fleets. They don't keep aircraft as long as maybe airlines in other regions. Just generally speaking, Asia is always had a young fleet and will continue to have a young fleet. So you have renewal, you have the return of growth, but a lot of the short-term kind of spade or frenzy is just the lack of capacity and the fact that there's a sense that there's not many delivery slots, especially kind of in the near term, available anymore because you have supply chain issues and delivery delays and so forth, and you have general shortage of capacity at the moment. So airlines are all of a sudden interested in getting their hands on as many aircraft as possible, particularly kind of in the shorter or medium term, as well as looking at their longer term requirements, which they kind of always do. So there's a lot of catch up there, and there's after a few years not much activity, and there's a lot of interest or concern that if you don't maybe do something now, that you won't be able to get the delivery slots that you really need as an airline in order to both renew your fleet and to resume growth in the post-pandemic era. So it's a good time to be the manufacturer again. From a demand perspective, of course, it's not very good because they have supply chain issues and they can't actually deliver what they're supposed to be delivering. And you have issues with some of the installed fleet, particularly the Pratt & Whitney issue, of course. So it's kind of a very unique time, I would say, in many respects. We're not really at a new normal. We're kind of in this kind of unusual period of very high demand and a lot of capacity constraints, and nobody really knows when this kind of period will end. My thought would be that by if you asked me a year ago, I thought maybe by now we'd kind of be past this kind of abnormal period, but for various reasons, it looks like we could be in this abnormal period for another year or even longer, just because of the supply chain issues and other issues that are impacting the industry at the moment.
Well, let's stick with that, and we'll just talk about the MRO issue. And then there was also, I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a company that was caught using, uncertified false parts and things like that. And what, from where you sit, what does the MRO situation look like? I mean, you can't just it's a big process to reactivate a plane, and there's a lot of checks that have to be done and so on and so forth. So yeah, you could bring them back out of storage, but then the MRO slots get filled up and things like that. You talked about capacity. I have a feeling they're trying to keep capacity tight and keep fares high, but as you mentioned, there's also supply chain issues. Is there a single cause for the supply chain issues? Are there multiple causes? Is it a lack of trained people that were laid off during the COVID pandemic, or what are you seeing?
Well, then there's multiple issues causing the supply chain issue, and I don't think airlines are holding back capacity. I mean, you have at least not in this region. You have a lot of competition that's quite intense. So airlines are eager to bring back capacity and to compete. And eventually, I think we will be back in the overcapacity situation, particularly in Southeast Asia. Just look at the dynamic in terms of the number of airlines, the number of competitors, and the way they behave. Typically, it's different than say Europe, North America, or even Australia. So we that the situation is I don't think these airlines have changed really. It's just that there's just capacity constraints. MRO is a big one, and it's just taking a very long time to bring back aircraft. I mean, borders reopened 18 months ago, at least here in Southeast Asia, and the fleet is still not fully returned to service. And of course, I kind of suspected this would happen, and I predicted this, at the beginning actually. But a lot of airlines had unrealistic timeframes for bringing back aircraft, just because some of these aircraft, particularly here in Southeast Asia, they weren't in very good condition. They were parked. They weren't brought to the desert like, a few airlines that bring them to the desert, but a lot of airlines left their airplanes sitting here. They were cannibalized. And what happens is you bring back the airplanes that are easiest to bring back first, and even those planes weren't that easy because you needed parts and there was supply parts shortages, so airplanes have been stuck in the hangar twice as long, getting those parts and so forth. But now we're starting to get to the kind of the end of the barrel. The airplanes that are in the worst condition need the most work, and then you compound that with parts issues still, and it takes a long time. And some of these airplanes could even be written off potentially, just because the condition is such. But at the same time, you really want to bring back these airplanes because if you put the capacity in, it's immediately profitable because demand is higher than supply. So it's taken a long time to work through this backlog of inactive aircraft, and some airlines also haven't resumed deliveries yet of new aircraft, partly because they still have this backlog of inactive aircraft sitting around, and leasing companies might be a bit reluctant to give an airline an aircraft from their relatively limited supply when that same leasing company has an airplane sitting on the ground with the same airline. They prefer that airline to get that asset back in the air than to use one of their new assets. So it's a tricky situation still 18 months later, and I hope eventually we get to the end of this, but it just keeps on being delayed, and it's not getting easier, it's getting harder. So we could still be talking about this 6 months from now, even though some airlines promised to get their fleet reactive by the end of the year. I actually don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a lot longer. And I talked to a lessor. You mentioned the leasing companies. I talked to a lessor the other day. He said he couldn't beg, borrow, or steal a plane. He said there's no inventory out there for me to get. So it was kind of interesting. Let's switch gears just very quickly because there's on airports. It's very interesting. Singapore has restarted its restarted construction on its new runway. Here in Cambodia, they're building 2 new airports, one in Siem Reap, one in Phnom Penh. I think AirAsia actually mentioned that they would be moving to the new airport in Siem Reap. Are these new airports worth the investment, or are they going to be underutilized for the next couple of years? I mean, there's an airport in Sri Lanka that was built with Chinese money that's sitting empty, and there's no passengers. So, are we building too many airports, or is it a good balance?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the airport, of course. I mean, some markets need new airports, but then they open too early, so they're empty for a while, or they open in the wrong place. The one in Sri Lanka opened in the wrong place. The Matala airport, it was a political project. You build it in the middle of nowhere. I was there several years ago, and everybody knows from the beginning that it's never going to be filled, that it's a white elephant. And there's other white elephant airports around Asia, or maybe not as drastic as the Matala example in Sri Lanka, but there are others. You say Cambodia has 2 new airports. Well, actually, they're getting 4 new airports. Okay. I mean, because there's 2 airports opening in new places that clearly there's virtually no demand, right? So, one of which is almost complete. Another one I think is just kind of starting. But Siem Reap, we were talking earlier. The traffic right now is 25% of 2019 levels. So it's when the airport opens next month, that's when it's supposed to open. All the airlines will shift out to the new airport. I mean, the existing airport, which is not that large, is very quiet right now because traffic hasn't come back. So it will be a while before it's utilized. But the Siem Reap example is you have a downtown airport or close to downtown. It has an environmental impact on the temples and so forth. So you kind of had to move that airport. Some airports are built in funny places like the Sri Lanka one. There's a lot of activity in Indonesia as well. In the last few years, but also coming up. Another move that's coming up in October as well is the move from Bandung to Kertajati. Kertajati is an airport that opened actually in 2018, but has struggled to track traffic. It's located in kind of a remote area of West Java, about a couple hours from Jakarta and about an hour from Bandung, based on the new toll road at least. But it's not on the train line. It hasn't attracted traffic. Now they're going to close the Bandung downtown airport to all jets at least. The only turboprops will be left there. But the question is will all the airlines actually move all the capacity? Probably not, because the location of the new airport is such that it's in some cases easier just to go to Jakarta rather than to the new airport outside Bandung. Similar case with the Yogyakarta airport, which opened in 2020. These markets have declined in size or haven't recovered. If you look at like the Bandung market and the Yogyakarta market, the recovery is below the Indonesia average. So it's like 50% recovered rather than 70-80% recovered because of the location of the new airport. So it's not so great. So there's but overall you need the infrastructure. So there's a lot of airports that need to be replaced, and particularly in the main cities, or need to be expanded because there's no more slots left for airlines. It's just that sometimes the airports are just not opening in the right places or not opening in the right time.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, we're running out of time. We're getting on our last two questions, and my question is in Southeast Asia, but let's say Asia in general. Business travelers, leisure travelers, I've seen, just from my own unscientific sort of looking around, I've seen a healthy mix of both. I think business travel has come back faster than predicted. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, business travel, some elements of it definitely have come back faster than predicted, and even though it's not fully recovered, but it really does vary the kind of business travel. There was people thought business travel would be like really down a lot, that everybody would like switch to Zoom, but of course that you can't really replace Zoom. There was revenge business travel, basically. Everybody talks about revenge travel, revenge leisure travel. People who didn't travel for a holiday for a few years or didn't see their families or friends around the world, all of them wanted to travel more frequently once borders reopened, and you're still kind of seeing the impact of that. But there was also revenge business travel in that people weren't seeing customers or weren't seeing their colleagues, weren't going to events, and in the initial time frame, some elements of business travel were back fully or even higher than pre-COVID levels, but other elements, other components maybe were not. So you don't have an overall recovery in business travel, but you have maybe a higher than feared level. But I think a lot of those skeptics or a lot of those people predicting business travel wasn't going to come back or hardly come back at all. That was kind of overblown. That was quickly proven to be the case. Business travel is here to stay. It's just maybe it's a little bit different. There's a lot of people combining business and leisure now as well. So the patterns have changed. But the fundamental demand for a lot of the components of business travel are still there.
And a lot of the conferences are coming back. I'm going to Dubai in November and Singapore in November as well. I'm going to MRO Asia, so the conferences are coming back, so people are traveling for those as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of conferences. Some of those conferences I'll be at here as well, like MRO and AAPA. So, I mean, and there's even more conferences than there were pre-pandemic. There's some new events as well that have popped up. So, the conferences are still, it's good use of business travel because you get to meet a lot of people at once. So, I think those are still in demand. I mean, there might be too many, but there's still a value, of course. So maybe some of the other elements of business travel, like going to flying several hours to have one meeting, that kind of stuff. Some companies have cut back on maybe, but there's also this element of flexible working, so people combining business and pleasure, or working remotely and then doing some meetings while they're there. I mean, and of course it's hard to necessarily quantify or define this kind of travel when how does an airline or an airport even know the difference when somebody boards a plane, whether it's business or leisure, or sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. So overall, I just would say that the market is back, or close to being back, but the patterns have changed. And everybody knew this, post-pandemic travel is not the same as it was pre-pandemic. Even if you're looking at China now recovering, you're talking about earlier the group travel being way down. Question is, will group travel actually fully recover? Well, maybe not. Maybe the Chinese, have shifted more to FIT, which probably would have happened anyway because even without the pandemic, because income levels change, middle class expands. You had a lot of FIT travel outbound China from the main cities like Guangzhou and Shanghai and Beijing, but now you're starting to see more FIT travel from the secondary and even tertiary cities. There's just been changing travel patterns. So the market might be back 100% soon, but it's not the same 100%. The whole mix is different. And it'll be a while before we really know exactly where that settles down, where that mix is, and how different airlines or different airports, different countries benefit more from the new mix compared to the old mix. Certainly when you change the mix, it means that some benefit more than others, and some are disadvantaged in terms of which airlines, which airports, which countries, which markets are more disadvantaged. So it's uneven. Like I was saying, it's even when we have a recovery, it still will be uneven.
Okay. Last question, Brendan. We're running out of time. Always try to end these shows on a bright note if it's possible. Future bright for Asian aviation overall? Any one particular region that's going to do better than the others, or is it the rising tide is going to lift all the boats?
I mean, I think all the regions are well positioned in their different ways. South Asia and Central Asia, which we haven't really talked about, are actually the two sub-regions of Asia Pacific that have fully recovered first. Central Asia has already fully recovered last year. South Asia also now fully recovered. And a lot of people talk about India. So much attention on India in the last year. The domestic market, of course, there's so much happening in the airline space there as well. But really, the outbound India traffic, is the new kind of source market for so many countries in terms of tourism. So China, outbound China, even if it fully recovers, it's never going to grow like it did in the decade before the pandemic. It had that period of growth that's probably not repeatable. So a lot of people are banking on India growth, outbound India growth, but also just general India growth, including domestic India growth, with all the aircraft going into that country, with all the tension with the supply chain. And all the suppliers are obviously very excited about India, and Central Asia also has starting to get a lot more attention. LCCs are starting to penetrate Central Asia for the first time. I do a lot of my work in Central Asia actually, and it's a very exciting region at the moment because of the growth potential. But Southeast Asia as well, Indonesia hopefully will return to growth. I was mentioning especially the domestic market. It's going to be a while before we get back to that 100 million passengers that they had in 2018, and that's by far the largest market in Southeast Asia. But overall, a lot of hopefulness and bright outlook for Indonesia over the long term, as well as some of the other countries in Southeast Asia, and then of course North Asia, and Australia, New Zealand, Asia Pacific. I mean, it's such a massive region, but you cannot put it all in one category. Even Southeast Asia is so diverse. But overall speaking, there's opportunities in so many places. And there's growth, to be had. So in the long term, but it'll be a little bit uneven and dynamic as it always is here in this region.
Okay. Brendan Sobie, and Brendan, I forgot to mention the name of your company. It's Sobie Aviation, correct?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Sobie Aviation, and thank you. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you and to be on this podcast. Hopefully, in another year's time, I can come back on and we can talk about it being at 100% recovered.
I hope so too. Brendan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay.